Iron Maiden is one of the most recognizable heavy metal bands on the planet. It's really to the point where you could just call someone off the street, ask them to name metal bands, and Maiden, there's a good chance, is going to be one of the names that they utter. We've talked a lot about Maiden throughout the years. We've done a full discography review of each of their albums, all 16 of them now, and we've also talked about some of the best songs off of each of those albums. But there's one thing that is strangely absent. We have never ranked those albums from worst to best, and saying worst is kind of weird considering there really isn't a bad option among the 16 of them, hard as that is to believe for some folks. So that's what we're going to do today, and I want to get your opinion on this, your lists, in the comments section below, so definitely get to it. And if you're missing any Iron Maiden albums from your collection, then we do have 3 Amazon stores where you could pick up the one that perhaps has eluded you all of this time. So let's stop talking and let's start analyzing. Let's rank them all, baby! And we're going to start with number 16. Number 16 is Virtual 11. This is the second act of the Blaze Bayley era of Iron Maiden, and while it does have some great songs on it, such as Como Está Amigo or The Educated Fool, it also has The Angel and the Gambler. It also has The Angel and the Gambler. It also has The Angel and the Gambler. Repeat that about 50 more times and you'll understand, yeah, The Angel and the Gambler. Number 15 is No Prayer for the Dying. This is from the early 1990s era of Maiden after their 80s glory, and you could definitely tell some of the turmoil, conflict, and some even disinterest that was perhaps going on with the group at this period of time. Because while this is a very serviceable and listenable album, it still does have some filler material that has left some people scratching their heads a little bit as time has moved forward. Number 14 is Iron Maiden, the self-titled debut record where Maiden burst on the scene with Paul Di'Anno, not with Bruce Dickinson. And while this is an album where Di'Anno really pours his heart into it, it definitely has a different sound than what Maiden would produce during their classic 80s lineup. And while for some this is one that deserves to be much higher up and at the top, for me, this is where it goes. Number 13 is Dance of Death. During the second Bruce Dickinson era, this is the album that, despite its title track's fantastic sound and feel and just overall context, is one that kind of lacks a little bit. It has a lot of songs that sort of start to run together, and it just does not feel quite as cohesive or great as Brave New World, which preceded it. Number 12, A Matter of Life and Death. You can kind of see Dance of Death for this one, where it does have some great and impassioned material on it. However, it still feels like the band was still trying to gain back some of the momentum that they had with Brave New World, and came up with a disc that felt a little bit more cohesive, had a couple of more surprises that were included on it. However, this one still feels a little bit underappreciated, perhaps. Number 11 is The Final Frontier. Whenever this album dropped, it was instantly heralded as fairly great, but whenever you look at the really bulky discography of Iron Maiden, it's one that just feels like it has a lot of work to do. It has a lot of great ideas that are a little bit different from what Iron Maiden was doing, even in the context of the second Dickinson era, but still, it didn't seem like they were going to fully get the real scope and tint of their new identity until much later on. Number 10 is Fear of the Dark. This is, again, that early 90s era of Iron Maiden, and this is one that felt like it had a little bit more oomph and passion behind it. Like it had that desire that was still thirsting from the end point of their 1980s discography. I love the title track off of this, as well as a couple of others, and it's an album that just overall, between itself and No Prayer for the Dying, has a little bit more of that cohesiveness to it, and I like what they did. Number 9 is Killers. This is where the band started to really ramp up a little bit. This is an album that for some is a black sheep, for others is considered to be absolutely god tier, so the opinions are kind of all over the place. This is a disc that, whenever you listen to it though, just feels a lot of fun, and it has a lot of great material that still maintains itself as both concert favorites and fan favorites to this very day. Number 8 is The X Factor. The first album from the Blaze Bayley cycle of Iron Maiden is sort of given a bad reputation. And this is one that I think is so high on the list for me is because it is literally one of the most different Iron Maiden albums that you're going to hear. It is one that's notably softer. It is one that has a lot more darkness that sort of comes into it whenever it comes to its production value. You feel a bit distant from this album, and that it's shrouded by a little bit of mystery or misery, one of the two. But overall, this is an album that tells a heck of a story, and the first time I listened to it was a real surprise, considering I was told by so many Iron Maiden fans that the Blaze Bayley era was not really for the weak of heart, and easily could have been skipped. How wrong they actually were whenever it came to this disc. Number 7 is Brave New World, which is the first album from Maiden that I ever heard, and one that definitely still retains a lot of personal value to this day. And this is the first album in Bruce Dickinson's return. And the band just felt really fresh at this period of time, considering the last memory was Virtual 11, which, as we've already mentioned, was relatively forgettable. But this is a band that burst forth with the tracks such as The Wicker Man that felt like a really huge single. But then you listen to the rest of the album and you realize that that was just scratching the surface. And that songs such as Blood Brothers really just gave this band a brand new identity. And having 3 guitarists was actually going to help them out massively. Number 6, The Book of Souls, the most recent album, the first ever double album if you don't count live releases, and Iron Maiden just absolutely nailed it out of the park with this disc. And again, this is one that is at the bottom for some and at the top for others, considering it's got a very wide variety of range, considering the opinions. But I love what this album did. It was very narrowly a perfect score whenever it was released, and whenever we first, talked about it, it was. It narrowly lost out that year's Album of the Year race. This is just a great, it's a great album that really shows, similar to what we got with Threshold's album, the Legends of the Shires last year in 2017, that a band that is really been around for a while can take on this idea, put their own spin on it, and really do a phenomenal job. I love what this album was able to accomplish. Number 5 is Somewhere in Time. Now we're getting into the 1980s classics, so really from here on out, it's kind of a pick'em. But Somewhere in Time has an absolutely addicting opener and has great tracks that surround it going forward afterward. And this is just a fantastic disc that showed that they were on a high right at this period of time, where they were releasing albums literally one a year and had no opportunity to ever get off of that great musical plateau. Number 4 is Peace of Mind. Basically copy-paste the reasoning for number 5, for Somewhere in Time. This is just a band that was on a mission, and they were taking over the 1980s one album at a time. While there was thrash metal that was starting to really heat up and pick up a lot of momentum, Peace of Mind, and traditional heavy metal, that new wave of British heavy metal sound was still going very, very strong, and alongside of Judas Priest, it really felt like this band, Iron Maiden, was taking over the world. Number 3, Number of the Beast, the album that really felt like was their coming out party, the album that felt like Iron Maiden had just produced the 5 or 6 star classic, the album that really felt like it was going to live forever, and it has lived forever. This is an album that every metal fan no doubt knows, and a ton of those same metal fans have in their collection. It is absolutely resplendent. But number 2 is Power Slave. While Number of the Beast was the classic album, Power Slave is actually the better album, at least in my opinion. They take a little bit of that Egyptian theme to it. They're able to spin their own little take on it, have great songs such as Splash of the Blade, 2 Minutes to Midnight, Ace is High, the big time, long, classic Rime of the Ancient Mariner. This is an album that is chock full of so many classics. It is really just begging to be seen as the more important album than Number of the Beast, but history, of course, tells us otherwise. But whenever it comes to all of that, none of them compare to number 1, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. It's not only because this is the closest that Iron Maiden treaded toward progressive music in their initial run all the way up until the early 2000s, but it's also because this concept album felt larger than life. It felt like the Book of Souls felt a couple of years ago, only it was during the 1980s era. It was the real swan song of that classic set, and it still is the album that if I want to listen to something from Maiden, immediately it's the first thing that comes to my mind, and I kind of have to pry myself away from it in order to listen to one of the other 15 great albums that they've been able to produce for us. Seventh Son is an underappreciated and underrated album that those that have a savage, following or feeling toward it are going to defend it to the absolute death. And well, I just happen to be one of them. Where is it on your list? Let me know. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 16 classic albums. No real wrong answers amid all of them. Again, I will repeat, if there's any Maiden albums that are missing from your collection and you now have the spark to get them, scope out the links to the Amazon pages for the UK, the Canadian page, and the US page down in the comments below, or the description box below, rather. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to know your list in the comments. I'm Cover Killer Nation. If you're not subscribed already, you're going to want to, because we have a lot more metal to talk about. And I will talk to you next time. Take care.